everyone, welcome back. You are with the Fab Fatties. My name is Alyssa.
Rebecca.
Allie.
And today we are talking about skinny people, mid-sized people, fat people, really fat people, and super fat people. And, these terms have been used in our community, some longer than others, and our levels of, comfort with them also vary. So today we're going to kind of dive into that conversation and see where it leads us. But Rebecca's going to start us off with some definitions.
I am a teacher. Let's go. All right, so I think whenever I first started blogging, it was pretty obvious right away that there were different kinds of plus size experiences. Yeah. And as someone who has been, I lived, I would say, I started blogging around 22, and up until a couple of years ago, I was size 26 plus. And I knew immediately that because I was size 26, I was not the norm in the plus size space.
Sure.
So there's lots and lots of retailers that sell plus size. They stop at size 20, 22, 24, right? And then you get less and less choices as you get into 26, 28, 30. And then there's barely any choices if you're 32, 34, 36 to 40. And so I knew it from a fashion perspective that plus size was not one size fits all, even for plus size, right? And as I was in the space more, I started hearing some terms to help explain this. So this is where we get into some spectrum terms. And some of this language comes from fashion. And some of this language comes from the fat community who has developed it over time as a way to talk about real things that were happening. And I do think, again, I love words. And words are created to describe things. So
to communicate.
To describe ideas, to be able to share and build on them. So I think these words are interesting. So one word you might hear people talk about is straight size. Straight size is pretty simply someone who is not fat. By the way, all of this information I got from this blog post called Fategories, which I think is
hilarious.
I love that.
And the website is fluffykittenparty.com, which is really random. But
I also love that.
It's a someone in the community's blog. And she's had a lot of people respond and has edited and kept kind of up to date and taken in feedback for it. So I thought it was a really well written community post basically that she did. So a straight size person is someone that is not fat, someone who is not fat. Oh my gosh, my grammar got me. They don't require plus size clothing, and their body size isn't a barrier for them in their daily life.
They can walk into a store, pick off something off the rack, and something in that store is going to fit them.
Right. And note that none of this has to do with but positive body image. People can feel however they want about their body. Is that literally their body fits into all the public spaces that they need to go in, and they require clothing that is fairly well accessible at different price points, right? A mid-sized person is a newer term, and that is someone. It's a term that I think this is interesting. This blog post says this is a term for straight-sized people. I think it's interesting. But they coin it to describe they're not skinny, but also not fat. They are mid-size, and they're often around a women's size 12 or 14 in the U.S., and in some cases smaller. And I have seen people probably size 10 start using this term, but I would say between 10 and 14 they're using this term. And they say this is a variant of straight size, but that it's on the spectrum of straight size. They're on the larger end of the spectrum of straight sizes.
Is that because that's the average size?
No, because the average size is actually 18, size 18.
So it's bigger than what they're saying is mid-size.
Right.
Well, then that doesn't make sense to me. That should be part of straight size, and mid-size should be the mid.
Well, mid-size is technically part of straight size.
Mid.
Yeah.
You're not.
But think about
skinny,
how many
not fat.
retailers only go to a size 24. If that's the case, they are the midpoint of those sizes.
I guess that's true.
Sure.
Yeah. But basically these folks most likely aren't having to go into the plus size section. They might be getting the extra large, the extra extra large. They might be getting the 14, 16. But generally they're finding their clothes at most retailers in the straight size section. even though we do know that some straight sizes literally have 3 sizes, small, medium, large, right? And so that's where they do have some different experiences than the smaller end of the spectrum of straight sizes.
And I do think it's an important distinction. And I think it's probably important for us to get through this and then kind of go into our feelings. But I do think it's an important distinction to say that, while they may at times find themselves venturing into plus size, they are not limited by only plus size.
Yeah. So it says, and this is back to your points, mid-sized people are right in the middle of the bell curve of sizes. We know that's not true if this is based on, because a lot of sizes go up to 40 beyond, right? But they're not considered fat by the majority of the population. Majority of population aren't going to look at them and say you're fat. All right, so what you were talking about is what they call small fat. So a small fat is a U.S. woman's 18 or in the 1X, 2X range. And they're on the smallest end of the fat spectrum. So we've left behind the straight size spectrum. We are now in the fat spectrum. These are people who are likely to be seen as fat by other people, but they're generally not shut out of many areas of their life solely due to their weight. So again, they're probably still going to fit into an airplane seat. They might not even need a seatbelt extender. They're going to have some issues finding clothing, but they're going to have more access than others. But they still might face weight bias in a doctor's office. They still might have people express concerns about their size, etc. Then we get to mid-fat. And these are sizes US 20 to 24, 26, usually 2X to 3X. And again, this is where we see a lot of brands start dropping off, all right? And I had to say, a 2X, 3X is not the same everywhere. I'm sitting here thinking, boutique 2X, 3X is much smaller than, a Torrid 2X, 3X.
I'm even thinking Anthropology. Anthropology goes up to a 3X, and Anthropology 3X is not the same as a Torrid 3X.
Right. And so these are people who are mid-fat typically do have to shop at plus-size retailers. They can't go and find straight size clothing that's going to fit them. Can't go to Target's A New Day collection and fit into the XXLs. They're not going to be able to work with that. They don't have as many brick and mortar stores to shop at. So again, you'll notice a lot of these terms pop up in fashion spaces, and it is a lot about access to clothing, even though we know this starts shaping other things. They do face much more institutionalized sizeism, and they're most likely going to experience weight stigma at work, in their relationships, healthcare. They're probably going to have some trouble accessing public spaces like chairs, certain seatings, and they are still accommodated to a certain degree more than people on the larger end of the plus size spectrum. So again, if we think about Target as a pretty accessible store to most of America, they go up to a 4X, and I believe for them that is a 26, 28. Now, when I was a 28, their jeans did not fit me. So again, I question some of it. It's not necessarily the same as a plus size retailer's plus size.
Right.
But they might be able to walk into their neighborhood big box store and find something that fits. Even though they likely would experience issues flying on a plane, having a seatbelt that fits, all of that stuff, right? So they are facing barriers. Large fats are women's size 26 to 32 or 4X, 5X. And there are some these are where some of the terms start changing.
Yeah.
But essentially, this is where you really are only able to work with specifically plus size retailers in terms of getting clothing. You're having to access that stuff. You're not going to find things in any kind of neighborhood store. You're going to have to find specialty stores whose customer is a plus size customer. This one also, sometimes people call Lane Bryant fats, which apparently was coined by writer Roxane Gay. And I know people have complicated feelings about Roxane Gay as a voice for the fat population. I haven't spent enough time reading her work to say anything about that. But they're on the larger end of the fatness spectrum, and their access gets smaller. We're going to keep seeing access get smaller and smaller to material goods like clothing, but also again, they're going to face significant issues when it comes to facing stigma or discrimination, and then also accessing physical spaces. And then there's the term super fat, and this is often used for women size 26 and up, which obviously does overlap with the large fat.
Mm-hmm.
I know that when I was I was a size 28-30, I identified as a super fat. And that was a terminology I was used to.
Mm-hmm.
And this is definitely a community term. It was coined by the community. So this is a community term, and they often used it because those voices were so diminished. So even if you're in a plus size space, this is when you start seeing some in community stigma. All right.
Yeah.
I'm a fat, but I'm not a super fat.
Yeah.
You know. So these people are facing not only stigma from all that was already there, but also they might face it in the community itself. And they experience a lack of access. They experience discrimination or lack of access issues on a daily basis. They're excluded often from many public areas of life. They're not going to be able to go to the theater and see a show and fit it there. And we know that probably starts, I would say, in my experience, that access really gets limited size 24 and up, in my experience of public spaces.
Yeah.
And then there's an infinifat.
Mm-hmm.
That was coined by Ash of the Fat Lip. She has a podcast. I'm not sure if she's still posting or not, but she is active on social media. That's women's sizes 32, 34 and up.
Mm-hmm.
And again, they have significant barriers based on sizeism, and they're underserved by the businesses that serve plus size customers. So it's very rare that there are businesses or products that serve them. And then again, even in the community, they're not finding very much support from those who identify as fat or in the fat community. They may have to have their clothing custom made because there's no place to buy it. And they're excluded from participating in many areas of public life and face intense discrimination and mistreatment in healthcare. And this is where we'll start seeing a lot of people getting ultimatums in medical care or forced to do certain medical acts that they might not want to. And I also feel like this tends to get the people who are often used in media for I don't know what the word I want to say. Sensationalized, pretty dehumanized. And so they're faced the worst of the weight stigma.
Yes, absolutely.
So those are some of the different terms that are used popularly. I'm sure there's other terms.
Yeah.
But I started learning some of these terms fairly early on in my journey of being publicly online, especially super fats.
Yeah.
Maybe because that affected me personally. I didn't hear about mid-size until probably 5 or 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So some of them are newer, and I think are a product of body positive conversations, are a product of talking about sizes more. But I'm kind of curious when you came across some of these terms, or which terms are new to you or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, I do think, and thank you for covering all of that for us.
I thank you, the blogger, for covering all of that.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Comprehensive list. We appreciate it.
I do think it's important when we're talking about all this, right, to acknowledge that these terms are used both simultaneously and in different ways throughout the community, and also a little bit outside the community as well. But I do think, right, that we have to talk about this spectrum in both looking at it as ways that people truly identify themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have found identity in their fat bodies, and they're using these terms in a neutral way, right? Mm-hmm. Which can be empowering, right? Which can be empowering to say, you know, this is the body type that I identify with. So I'm looking for other bodies like mine, so that, you know, I know where you guys are shopping, I know where you're doing this, and I know where you're doing that, and I know that, you know, if I follow this person who has a body like mine, who says that they're a mid-fat, who says that they're a mid-fat, then, you know, they had this great experience at this location doing something, so maybe I'll have a great experience there as well because they have a similar body type to mine, right?
Yeah.
But I also think it's important to acknowledge that this is also a spectrum of privilege and accessibility, right? Because as you talked about, and as our blogger here talked about, as we go up on that spectrum, the accessibility goes down, right? It goes down, and it's the privilege goes down, right? The privilege of taking up space goes down, and it's not the way that we talk about taking up space, right? But it's the way that the world offers that space, right? And so for me, I have it really has been in the last few years that I've really gotten more familiar with all these different terms. And like you, I was in a super fat body. And I myself, it's hard. It's hard. I see. Are you getting upset?
Yeah, I am. It's okay. Keep
Are you
going.
okay?
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Okay. It's hard to acknowledge the privilege I recognize myself having now, just due to unintentional weight loss, right? But now being in a mid-fat body versus a super fat body, it's hard to acknowledge the privilege that I have now of the access that I have now, the access to clothes, access um, to an airplane seat, to seating, to things that even again in a mid-fat body that we're starting in that category on the spectrum or whatever, that we're starting to lose that access, right? It's still, it is a different world for me than it was when I was in the super fat category, right? And I fucking hate that. I hate that. I want it to be that everybody gets to experience everything in the same way, right? That everything is accessible to everybody. So I'm appreciative of how we can use these terms to identify and connect with each other. But I do think that there's a way that we're weaponizing these terms as well, especially on the more privileged end of the spectrum. And I know that those are probably just some very big feelings that I have. But Alyssa, I want to know what's going on with you over there.
Yeah, I started to get really anxious as Rebecca was reading through the spectrum.
Yeah.
And I am actively trying to process that in my brain right now. And I'm having some not great thoughts come up. Of like, part of this podcast and the journey I've been on has been like, owning the fatness and being like, this is who I am and this is the space I take up. But I literally felt like the strangling suffocation as we worked our way like through the list. And while I don't look at anyone who is fatter than me in any negative light, I can't sit here and say I'm not thankful I'm thankful that I'm not there, and also like I feel like I'm there at the same time. So I'm having some very complex thoughts come up that I was not anticipating with this conversation. I obviously know that there is a spectrum and a grid, but I think it was just like as we're reading through it, I'm like, oh, I don't know. It feels I don't know.
Can I acknowledge that it's incredibly brave to just acknowledge that? Because it is brave to acknowledge that the privilege that you have, right? While also being aware of the privilege that you don't, right? It's so hard. It's so hard doing this work, right? Because sometimes it feels like you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, because sometimes the calls come from inside the house, right? Sometimes it's scary. It's scary to say, I hate that anyone who's bigger than me has a shittier experience than I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I was bigger. And I can acknowledge that I have different access now. I have more privilege now. It's scary to admit that in our community right now. I think it is. And I think it's brave to admit that. I'm wondering how you're feeling right now.
Well, I don't know. My mind is on something that I had a conversation with privately with Alyssa.
You please share.
Okay. So
It was, by the way, it was a beautiful conversation
It was.
and absolutely made me feel so good about our friendship.
yeah.
I'm so sorry. I don't know why I'm like,
Why are you sorry?
I don't know. This is like not the vibe of today. I was just like coming to hang out with my friends at the studio.
You're like, I got my happy flowers on.
I do have my happy flowers on. I bought these in Virginia.
Alyssa,
very
I think
pretty.
you look so beautiful today.
Oh,
I
my
want
God.
you to know that.
Which is crazy because of the video I sent you earlier today.
Listen, if you had seen me leaving my house, like the reason that I did not have makeup on when I was leaving the house is because I had to bring a washcloth with me. I was
How much you were sweating.
sweating.
Yeah, that's hot, y'all. So last week after we left our body image session,
Yeah.
all right, we went and had dinner together. And we talked, no cameras, no nothing. And we had one of the most heartfelt conversations we've had about body image.
Yeah.
And during that conversation, some of the things Alyssa said made me nervous to talk about my body, what my body used to be, and what my body is now. And I was thinking about what made me nervous about it, and I think about how I don't want to ever affect any of my friends in a negative way, right? But one of the things that I started feeling was that potentially, and Alyssa talked about how she has body dysmorphia. Potentially, Alyssa, when I talked about some of the issues I had at my largest size, because I had a beautiful life where I did all the things I currently do,
Yeah.
and I had a different access and different experience than I do now. Whenever I talked to Alyssa about it, I was concerned that Alyssa thought that she's having that same experience as I had then, and I needed Alyssa to know that it wasn't. And I needed Alyssa to know that it wasn't because I needed her to understand that how different my access was then.
Yeah.
So I asked her, I said, when I talk about, and I asked her this the other day, I said, when I talk about my body before I decided to have surgery, do you imagine it to be similar to your body now? And your answer was, it's not factually,
Yeah.
but you also feel like it is, right? It's
Yeah.
hard for you to separate it. You feel like you're.
Well, I feel like I'm struggling with some of those things.
Yeah.
Again, can acknowledge
right.
from a very different place. I'm struggling right now with moving my body and like feeling good and accessibility because I literally wasn't allowed to
Yeah.
for a year and a half.
Yeah.
Right? So like when you don't move your body for a year and a half, it takes a little bit to get it going again. Right? I know that is different than not being able to.
Right. And of course, when I was talking about my size, some of the stuff that I was struggling with was mobility, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're hearing me talk about some mobility issues I was having, and then you're like, well, I'm having some mobility issues, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to process. And you didn't know me at my largest size, right? But one of the reasons I wanted to talk to Alyssa about it was because it was important to me to feel seen and understood that my body at that point was a very different body, different than Allie's been larger too, but I was bigger than Allie. I needed it to be understood because I do think that I spent 10 plus years of my life in a super fat body at a size 30-ish. And that had major impacts on my experience of life. And that I know what it is to walk around this world as a super fat And I know now that people might see me and they see my access now, and they see my privilege now. And when I share some stories of my fatness, they might not be able to understand that I've had different experiences then to now. So that was a conversation we had, and you were really honest and beautifully vulnerable with me, you know? And I do feel like we both were able to be understood. And I think a lot of fat people do think they're bigger than they are. Believe me. Oh my gosh. Okay, this might sound a little bit mean.
No.
It's okay.
I've had lots of experiences where I've modeled with smaller people.
Mm-hmm.
The way they talk about their fatness, as if it's the only experience of fatness, as if they are experiencing the threshold of fat stigma. Oh my God, that hurts.
I think it's truly a lack of education. Like, we're talking about these. Yeah, well, we're talking about these terms. Like, I didn't hear the term infinifat and superfat till a year ago with you guys.
Yeah.
I was like, no, I knew there were people who are bigger. I didn't realize there was words for them.
For sure.
Right? I didn't put them all together. I didn't say, oh, like they have less access. Like I didn't put all of the pieces together.
Yeah.
What I love about that description is it doesn't just focus on clothes, right?
Yes.
And I think that because a lot of the fat community online is very fashion focused, I do think oftentimes these conversations get minimized to clothing. All right, let me take it off.
Oh.
Clothing matters so little. Clothing matters so little.
Rebecca, literally.
This is a different kind of episode today. I love this.
Rebecca just took her shirt
Did you see
off?
my awful wink I did to the camera?
Yeah, it was a little rough.
You know what? That's not your strong suit, but that's okay.
Also, what are you wearing underneath?
It's a little bandeau thingy.
I was going to say, it's not a cute bra. You chose a weird day to flash the camera, babe, because that ain't a bra I'm showing off.
I love how we can have so much compassion for each other and then roast your fucking bra and your wink.
No, she roasted her wink.
I did. Because the conversation is so limited to fashion, and I think my feelings are like the mid-sized folks really talk about fashion, then we forget that the larger end is not talking about fashion. They are. But they're talking about access. You know, and so I think that's what gets lost in the sauce of the popular discussions about size terms. What I struggle with the education part, you're new to this, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And you're diving it in, eyes wide open, wanting to understand.
Mm-hmm.
All right. It is very different than being in the plus size community. Actively having been in it, maybe making money doing fashion content for years, and never learning the larger end of the spectrum of what's happening, or never joining in on them, or never. Do you follow them? Do you follow people bigger than you?
Oh, I do.
Do you follow people bigger than you? Do you follow people? I'm so sorry. Do you follow people who have different lived experiences than you? Do you follow people who are not living in the same body as you and have different perspectives and different access and need your eyes on their work? Do you?
Question of the day. Because I think a lot of people follow what they consider their peers.
Yep.
And I've struggled with this when it comes to popular plus size people, because I do feel like there's a little bit of I'm going to follow my colleagues. And if they're popular or really, really popular, I mean, they're probably what I would coin a hot fat girl in some kind of way. And then they only follow other hot fat girls. Well, it's really interesting how limited that hot fat girl body actually is. What sizes that takes up, because they don't seem to hang out with people that are much bigger. And I need it. I need to see it. I say that knowing we're all very similarly sized, but we haven't all been similarly sized in our history.
Yeah.
We just happen to be similarly sized at the moment. And yeah, I think whenever I was on the larger end of the scale, of the spectrum, whenever I would be featured, it'd be on articles, plus size bloggers follow 28, size 28 plus. You know, I was only featured if it was about the people who were on the high end of the spectrum. Besides that,
Yeah.
Where was I? You know?
Yeah.
And it's not that I necessarily deserved recognition. I've never been like the most popular fashion blogger. It's the fact that so many of these brands only cater to certain sizes. And so many plus size features really only go to certain body types.
It really is so telling that so often, more often than not, right? When you see any kind of headlines about plus size bodies, it goes one of two ways. It's either we're celebrating plus size bodies and using hourglass, thin faced,
Beautiful
very
girl, but Hunter McGrady.
beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And there's nothing wrong with their
Right.
bodies.
There's nothing.
There's nothing wrong with their bodies.
It's just the most
Absolutely.
seen.
That is the most seen, the most socially acceptable bodies. Or on the flip side of that, we're seeing negative plus size headlines, and that's when they're using the bigger girls, right? That's when they're using the larger end of that spectrum, right? I have this creator that I just recently started following on Instagram. I want to say her name is Maya Douglas. I have to look at it. But she is fucking hilarious, and she is creating content that is just so like smack dab in your face. She literally posted the other day. She's like walking around New York City, and she saw this like ad on, like, I don't know, it was like on a bus stop or something, and it was for weight loss, and it was a plus size girl, and she was like, "Oh, good, plus size girls are still getting workout here, great," like, because it feels like we're not, it feels like we're not unless it's for weight loss, right? And so it is like, that spectrum is weaponized everywhere, right? It's like we're going to go to the smaller end of the spectrum when we say that we're celebrating plus size. But when we want to talk badly about plus size, we're going to go to the larger end of the spectrum, right? And we see that in so many different ways, and we see that bias in so many different ways too, right? And I think what people what people, this is hard to say. Not hard to say, but it's just, I think it's so hard to acknowledge, is that like, I genuinely think that people don't necessarily understand that, like, it's not always the fear of being on that larger end of the spectrum. It's the fear of the way that you're treated
100%.
on the larger end of that spectrum. And honestly, just in general, right? It's when Taylor Swift put out her original anti-hero video. I was thinking about this today a lot. When she put out her original anti-hero video before she made that edit, and she stood on that scale, she looked down and it said the word fat. And that was her nightmare. Her nightmare was to look down on that scale and see the word fat. And it's like, and I understand Taylor Swift has struggled with an eating disorder. So Alyssa has struggled with an eating disorder, right? We've struggled with restrictive eating, right? So many people that don't look like Taylor Swift, that look like us, have struggled with eating disorders and toxic diet culture, right? But it's not our nightmare. It's our lived reality, right? And the thing is, it's like, are you scared of being fat, or are you scared of being treated the way fat people are treated? And a lot of times it's very much you're terrified of the way that fat people are treated. And it's, the further you get on that spectrum, the worse you're treated, right? The less access you have, the worse you're treated. And having, I think too, a perspective of growing up with a dad who was on the very highest end of that spectrum my whole life, I saw it my whole life. And I saw the way he was treated my whole life. I saw the access he didn't have my whole life. And I think, and I'm not trying to like toot my own horn here, but it's like, I think that's one of the reasons why, like, I want to hold like so much space for like our largest friends. And like, I don't know how to say that in like, in any other way. but it matters to me. It matters to me so much that like that everybody feels seen, right? And I do think that the smaller end of that spectrum has done some damage. I do.
I disagree.
Okay. Thank you for not touching me.
Sore subject still. If you don't know what we're talking about, go to our Instagram page. I disagree, and here is why.
With what? Which part?
That the lower end of the spectrum has caused that last statement.
Okay.
You want to state it?
Well, do you want me to explain it first before you disagree with it?
Sure.
Okay. Or no, I want to hear your point of view first.
Okay.
I personally feel
It's okay.
I think the smaller end of the spectrum has done some damage to the body positivity movement.
Well, if we talk about the entire spectrum, including straight-sized,
Sure.
I think the body positivity movement was taken by people who have access when that's not what the body positivity movement was originally intended for. With that being said, negative body image is a universal issue.
Yes.
Period.
Yes.
Everyone deserves to have body positivity and body affirmations and self-love. That is a fact. However, the body positivity movement started out for folks who were underrepresented
Yes.
with their bodies in a positive way. Everyone related to the message, which is how it became something it wasn't intended to be. So, if we're talking specifically about the body positivity movement, 100%, I think people universally felt connected to the movement, and therefore it became something it wasn't intended for. It was intended for folks who were not represented in media. When we are talking about the terms, I know before I said I got anxious, but my true feelings around the terms, I don't care what you call yourself.
Sure.
Right? I think it's okay to acknowledge that mid-sized people have their own difficulties and struggles, and mid-fats, plus-sized people have their own struggles, and so on and so forth, right? Someone saying, like, oh, I'm a mid-sized person,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not an infinifat person, I think is the same feeling of me saying, like, yeah, no, I know I'm fat, and there is still a part of me who's thankful I'm not infinifat because of the issues they're dealing with, right? I think that's why I disagreed, right? Like I said, this rant that I'm going on started with that feeling was only that was coming from mid-sized folks. I think it is just a universal thought with so much diet culture. I mean, we're literally just preaching to always be in a smaller size. I think straight-sized people even relate to that. I think it's just so much like you take up too much space, you're too big, you need to be smaller.
Yeah.
You know, here's ways to be smaller. And I think that just becomes part of the dialogue. I know that the smaller you get, the more access you have. I think mid-sized folks also know that. I think they know they have access while also still being frustrated when they don't have access with, you know, maybe they say they go up to plus size, but like the straight size are still too small, you know, and then they go to plus size and the plus sizes are too big. Like, I think sometimes there is also that back and forth. Now I understand they're able to go back and forth, right? When you get to us, we can't go back and forth, right? But it doesn't make their experience any less frustrating.
No.
Right.
No.
So I think that's...
I'm going to say it's a less frustrating experience,
Well,
but it's a frustration. I'm just going to say I don't think a size 12 has the same frustrations I have in life. Like, I'm not going
I
to say it's
agree.
like the same level of
I
frustrations.
agree. I agree.
Would you say that about body image too?
No.
Well, no, because I'm talking about
Two
access.
different things.
I'm talking about size and access. Like I said, anyone from any size can have negative or positive body image.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm saying is a size 12 person is going to maybe feel frustrated that this one brand's jeans don't fit. But they don't have to be frustrated they can't fit on a plane. Like,
Yeah.
it's just not the same frustration
No,
to me.
100%. I'm not trying to put those two things in a category.
Well, but also thinking about like just keeping it in the fashion category, right? A size 12 person can fly without the fear of checking their bag,
Yeah.
right? I very rarely will check my bag because I know
Mm-hmm.
that I don't really have emergency options unless I can find a Torrid or a Lame Bryant, right?
Yeah.
I don't have emergency options if that airline loses my luggage. A size 12 person, right? If the airline loses their luggage, that's okay. They can run into Target, they can run into Old Navy, they can run into...
They'll be able to figure something out.
But see, that's the thing. I think even saying, oh, something, they have many, 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 many clothing options. So I think just saying like, I'm just laying it on the fashion. Like I think that they do have far less frustrations, but body image is universal. 100%. I agree with you on that all day long, right? Because again, the biggest starlet in the world, right? Her biggest fear is being fat. Body image is universal. Access is not. So I might disagree with you, you know?
I wasn't talking in reference to access. I
Sure.
100% acknowledge that the smaller you are, the more access you have. Period.
Yeah.
Right? I think I was disagreeing in the sense that the harm comes from the mid-size to straight size.
And I'm not attacking mid-size anything, right? I do feel that some of these terms that basically anything under fat, right, have come about in a way to almost say like, well, I know that I'm not, societally this, but I'm definitely not that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But no, I'm not putting that all on midsize. Where I saw a lot of that damage was just people in smaller bodies in general, right? In straight size. And right now I am going to lump mid-size into straight size because they wear straight size. Mid-size does fall into the straight size category, right? So I'm going to lump straight size right now into where what I really saw was during the pandemic was there were a lot of very small, or really kind of just a lot of straight size folks that were not accepting of all bodies, but because their daily lives changed, their daily routines changed, they saw their bodies changing, and therefore then were like, oh, I'm body positive. I'm body positive. Everybody is body positive. But it still didn't really, what I saw, it still wasn't applying to anything above a straight size.
I'm sorry, I'm confused. What did you see?
I saw a lot of fitness influencers. I saw a lot of
what I'm
lifestyle
picturing is like the one person that bends over and like, I have a single roll. Like, that's what
Yeah.
I imagine.
And I'm body positive.
Which isn't a
Yeah.
bad thing to post. It's just are you acknowledging that there's lots of other bodies out there? That's what I'm imagining when you're talking about this.
And that's exactly what I'm thinking of. That's that because they're not acknowledging. They're not acknowledging and they're not holding space for the people that actually really need the positivity from the body positivity movement.
I feel like that's where, sorry, I will pass it to you right now, but I do feel like that's where fat liberation came in. We were like, you can't take fat liberation from us because you're straight sized. Like you are not fat. That is factual. Right? Versus the body positivity, it was universal. I think that's where like,
well, it wasn't. Right? Body positivity was started by amazing fat black
100%.
girls.
That's what I was saying before. And then it became something it wasn't.
Yeah.
And that's where I think fat liberation then was born, because straight sized or smaller folks can't take that.
Yeah, to me, it's like the difference between I feel fat versus I am fat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's body image is everybody, but actual experience of fatness and how it affects your life is not everybody.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
But I will say, I think one thing important that I want to note for people listening, but also for both of you as you're thinking about these terms, is like when we think about what people are doing with the term midsize, it's not the everyday Joe Schmo. No offense to any Joe Schmoes, y'all living your lives, who are identifying as midsize and looking for content that talks about being midsize. It's the people who are publicly creating a discourse about midsize. That's influencers.
Yes.
That's people tagging it on Instagram. That's people making everything they put. I purposely went to YouTube this morning and typed in midsize. Now, I follow this girl named Carrie Dayton who does fashion content, thrifting content. She identifies as midsize. I think it's important for her to identify as midsize. She's a size 14, 16. She shops at plenty of straight size places that do not fit her correctly. She has shopped plus size, and then she'll show what's the difference between an XXL at Target and what's the difference between a 1X or 2X at Target. She shows that stuff. I love it.
Yeah.
I think she's super educational. She is midsize. She is not plus size. She is midsize, and sometimes her access gets a little wobbly. And I think she does a beautiful job of sharing that.
Sure.
When I'm also going down it, one of the things is, do I look good or do I just look skinny? And I'm like, eek! And I think the proximity to thinness for mid-sized folks can still mean a lot of the influencers are utilizing their proximity to thinness to market themselves.
We're talking like influencers.
Yeah, and I do think when I think of the term mid-size, I'm not thinking about my cousin who would probably describe herself as mid-size. I'm not thinking about my friend who would describe themselves as mid-size, because they're just going about living their life and having some different experiences in stores. Okay?
100%.
I'm thinking of the people who are creating a public discourse around the idea of mid-size.
Interesting.
100%.
I have not viewed this conversation from that lens. I have viewed it from like a universal lens. So I do think that is
so
an interesting bit. I do think people who are actively in the fat community, regardless, you need to be an advocate for the fat community.
But the thing is like mid-sized folks don't see themselves in fat community. And I think that's where I struggle.
Yeah.
Carrie Dayton, again, if you want an example of someone who does it well, I think she's someone who does it well. Not someone that's never made a mishap. I think she's learned a lot about how to talk about being mid-sized. She will often be like, oh, I got this thing from Target. It's available in plus size, da 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 da. She gives information. She knows she's on the line of straight size to plus size. And she acknowledges how things fit. And she gives information to her viewers who may be plus size, who may be fitting into the straight size. What I struggle with is mid-size influencers who only see themselves and their contemporaries as people their size or smaller. But like you noted, which I think is important, is that recreates itself at every size.
Yeah.
That recreates itself at every size. There could be people who are size 22 who only see themselves as like the size 24 and lower plus, you know, that they don't want to think about the people above. So I agree with you. That idea, that way of doing things is at every size. There's people who...
I think that's why sorry, Rebecca. I think that's almost why people who are on the farthest end of the spectrum get so frustrated within our community, because look how many there are of us, and yet we still shop at stores that don't carry their sizes.
Yeah.
Well, it's because what other options do we have?
What?
Now I'm second guessing myself.
No, I don't think I followed that.
No, so like even some plus size stores like don't carry
above a size 24 or something.
Right.
Oh, 100%.
So we're still shopping at them
100%.
because what options do we have? But also we're still making it okay for them to not have more sizes for people above us.
Oh,
you know?
I totally agree. And that that's something that that I, you know, like we were talking about earlier in the episode, that like I struggle with. I struggle with, knowing that just 2 years ago, I could not shop at some of the places that I shop at now, right? And where else am I supposed to shop? So it's so hard. It's so hard. And I have been loving the discourse lately too of like, Alyssa and I were at the pool the other day and I saw a plus size girl and I loved her 2-piece, but I knew exactly where it was from, right? And there's this discourse of like, yeah, we love each other's clothes, but I would love to look at you and say, hey, where did you get that badass outfit? And not, I know exactly where you got that outfit from because we're seeing the same goddamn thing over and over and over because we all have like the same 20 stores to shop from, right? So
it's so much better in America than other countries. Oh my gosh.
That I do know. That I do know. But no, back to your point, I think it was so brilliant of you, Rebecca, to help us get to that moment of understanding. Yes, I am specifically talking about the online community.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about our best friends. I'm not talking about our cousins or whoever's, right?
Yeah.
I am talking about the people who are specifically
marketing off the chat.
Marketing it, and
it's interesting. I don't feel like I follow a lot of those people, and good.
And
well, I mean, yeah, especially they're doing Carrie Dayton. Check her out; she's awesome.
Oh, I'll check her out.
But the thing is, I do follow people in all different kinds of bodies, right? And so I do see a lot of it. I see a lot of it, and I see it done well, and I see it done very badly.
Yeah, there's absolutely people who do it well.
Yeah, 100%. But there are people who do use it in a way to say, I'm not with them.
Yeah.
I know, I realize they're saying it, they're almost using it in a way to say, hey, I realize I'm not a Victoria's Secret model, but I'm definitely not what they are.
Yeah.
And it's harmful.
Yeah.
But again, I am not talking about our best friends walking down the street.
No, I'm with you.
I'm talking about the girl who is literally like, you should shop where I shop and give me your money off of my, let me earn commissions off of you, because I do understand them having that platform allows our mid-sized friends and cousins, whoever, to find people who look like them to say, hey, that dress looks good on her body, so it might look good on my body. I 100% want that for them, because finding Rebecca on Instagram for me years and years and years ago started, finding people like Rebecca started that for me. Started my journey, right? So I want that for everybody. Like if you find people that it's helpful for you to see these pieces that you want to wear, but you're afraid or whatever, like you see it on a body that looks like yours, you're like, you know what, I'm gonna do that. 100%. I want that for you. I want that for you. It's the online community that I want to do better.
Yeah, and listen, like again, this happens at larger sizes too. Again, like whenever I was a size 28, 30, did I feel absolutely excluded from people who are size 22, 24? Yes. Yeah. I felt like they did not want to be associated with me due to sizeism. Like I think it happens on every scale. I will say, if you're listening and you're curious about some things, like there are brands that go up to higher sizes. I will say what's not accessible is the price point of those brands. A lot of them are doing their own manufacturing or having to do special manufacturing because it's not an industry standard. And that's frustrating. I mean, listen, larger folks are going to find discrimination at work. Like they're probably not making the best money. I mean, like they're already facing that barrier most likely. And then this, the other thing I would say is if you are online and you follow people, like I think you mentioned following me and seeing that. When I first got onto blogs, I was like fascinated finding people that looked like me. Okay. Don't stop there.
Yeah.
Don't stop there.
Yeah.
Follow people, different ages, genders, races, different bodies that fit your message. Like that don't go follow them just because they're diverse.
Yeah.
Like that actually add value to your feed, and follow people that are bigger than you. And I will say most likely they're getting less support. So consider supporting them. Consider showing them support in some kind of way. I will just say, like, these terms are helpful because they do have a way of people talking to each other and talking about their experiences. And then we have a term we can say, like, hey, I get you're fat, but like I'm a super fat and I have a very different experience. And I love that people can say those things.
Yeah.
And people can use them to find each other and all of that stuff, right? But what I think the most essential part of that terminology for me and understanding the spectrum is understanding the different barriers that people face in social and material ways. And that it's not about how we feel about our bodies. Because again, none of us get free from that thing. But like actually how we get to go about this world. Because if you're struggling to feel good about your body and you can't even go to the mall and go to the food court and sit in a seat, that is going to be a different thing to struggle with than feeling bad about your body and slipping into that damn booth.
Yeah.
Okay? It's just a different thing that's going to be out in the world confirming or denying your feelings, right?
Yeah.
And I just think that this language asks us to recognize that.
Yeah.
And I think it's important when we do look into this or talk about it, or anyone gets on the mid-size or not debate, because there is a debate about it, that they remember it's not just about how people feel, but how they actually experience the world.
Yeah. 100%.
I think you did a really beautiful job there, wrapping up like all of our thoughts and feelings. And I also want to say that like I know I'm still learning, you know?
Yeah.
And I hope when people listen, they don't feel I'm worried that people are going to feel not represented by the terms and how we view them. So I feel like I want to also open up the conversation for people to come and join us and share maybe what they've seen online or who they're following.
Yeah, I'd love that. I'd love for people to join us down in the comments, because like mid fat, I'm fat, and I did identify with super fat, but like
I just am fat.
Yeah, same. I don't
listen. I can't make it more complicated right now because those levels really did start to give me a little like anxiety. I'm fat, and I'm gonna work on being good with that and not shrinking myself intentionally, and I'm just gonna live.
Yeah.
Yep.
Period.
Well, and I think it is important to recognize again that this is a way. This is a tool, right? It's a tool. It's a tool that people can use to communicate with each other, to identify, and all of these things. But at the end of the day, it doesn't change who you are.
Way to go, Allie.
It doesn't change how we feel about you, how we feel about you, our viewers and our listeners. It doesn't change who you are because somebody has slapped a label on you or because you've slapped a label on yourself, right? I have changed since I started openly calling myself fat, and I love that for me, but it's just a word.
Yeah.
It is just a word, and these are just words. And what's more important behind these words is the work that we do behind them.
And we are fat.
And we're fab.
And we're friends.
We'll see you next time, guys. Bye.